pendant broke the morning she stopped hiding. Odalis felt it happen before she understood it, a small give at the clasp, a warmth at her collarbone that had never been warm before, like a held breath finally let go. She was kneeling in the kennel yard at the time, packing snow-melt cloth against a yearling wolf's torn foreleg, and she did not stop what she was doing. She never stopped what she was doing. That was the whole of her survival, and had been for 19 years. The winter estate did not ask questions of the woman who mended its animals. It had taken her in during a blizzard when she was 11, half frozen and pendant locked and answering to nothing, and the old steward had simply handed her a blanket and a job and never once required her name to mean anything. She kept the kennels. She kept the injured things nobody higher up the hall had time for. She was, by any accounting the estate's ledgers would recognize, nobody at all. She did not know, kneeling there with her hands full of a frightened animal's blood, that the clasp at her throat had just begun to fail for the first time in 19 years. She did know that the yearling wolf, mid-whimper, suddenly went still and pressed its skull into her palm, the way it never had before, the way none of the Alpha King's wolves ever did, not to her, not to anyone who wasn't pack. Bastian Dracot had ridden 4 days through hard snow to reach his own winter holding, and the first thing his wolf did upon arrival, before the horses were stabled, before his steward could finish the list of grievances waiting for him, was drag him bodily toward the kennel yard. Not drag. He would not have called it that if asked. But something in him had turned, sharp and sudden, the moment he crossed beneath the gate arch, and he found himself walking toward the animal pens, with no memory of having decided to. Something in him had been quiet for 3 years. It was not quiet now. He stopped at the fence rail. A woman in a mended wool coat knelt in the frozen mud with one of his wolves, the yearling that had savaged 2 handlers and let no one near the wound, and the animal was leaning into her hands like it had found something it had been looking for. He did not know her. He was fairly certain of that, and then not certain at all, because something underneath his ribs disagreed. She looked up, grey eyes, steady, unbothered by his standing there in his travel dust and his rank. She did not rise. She did not apologize for the blood on her hands, or explain what she was doing with an animal 3 grown men had refused to touch. He tore it on the fence iron, she said, as if Bastian were simply the next set of hands available. It needs binding before he chews through the wrap again. Bastian found himself crouching at the rail without deciding to do that either. Corwin, the estate's ancient archivist, was the only person who noticed the clasp before anyone else did. The tarnish worn thin at one edge, the way she'd taken to pressing her palm flat over it lately, unconsciously, like a woman checking a wound was still closed. "How long have you worn that?" he asked her. Not really a question. The 3rd evening Bastian was in residence. "Since before I can remember not wearing it," Odalis said. Corwin was quiet a moment, the particular quiet of a man deciding whether a thing needed saying. "There was a warding practice once, before my time nearly. Bloodlines that ran too near the old packs used to be sealed at birth, scent-bound, so the wolves that would otherwise know them by breath and blood couldn't find them." He looked at her collarbone, not unkindly. 19 years is a long seal to hold. They don't usually last that long. "Mine has." "Had," Corwin said. "I'd guess it's failing. I'd guess that's why every wolf on this estate has stopped pretending you're a stranger." She said nothing to that. She went back to work. But she carried the number with her after that, heavier than it had been an hour before. 19 years. He found her again 3 mornings later, in the low light before the hall woke, sitting with the yearling's head in her lap, while it slept off the last of the fever. She hadn't heard him. He watched from the doorway and did not go in. This was becoming a habit he did not examine. She was humming something without words, and her hand moved over the wolf's ear, in the same absent, unpracticed rhythm she used for every wounded thing that came through the kennel gate. nothing performed in it, nothing waiting to be seen. He understood, watching her, that this was simply what she did, that she had been doing it, unwitnessed, for longer than he had known her existed. Something in him, not quite his own voice, recognized her before he had a word ready for what it was recognizing. He did not enter the room. He told himself it was because he did not want to wake the wolf. The estate steward mentioned, over supper, that the lady Ilvana Rothmere had sent word ahead of her arrival, 3 days out, delayed by the roads. Bastian's face did not change. His hand, Odalis noticed from her place, at the servants' end of the hall, went still around his cup for exactly as long as it took him to decide it shouldn't. "You knew her," Corwin said to Odalis later, not really asking. "I know what everyone knows," Odalis said. "That she was his once, that it ended." "It ended badly enough that no one in this hall says her name above a whisper," Corwin said, "which means it did not end the way she believes it did." He sought her out properly for the first time 2 days later, in the kennel yard, in the particular grey light of a morning that hadn't decided whether to snow. "How long have you kept the kennels?" he asked. Not a command. He crouched to her level to ask it, which she noted and did not mention. 6 years, keeping them alone. Longer, helping. I hadn't known that. He said it like an admission. 6 years, and I hadn't known your name until 3 nights ago. Most people don't, she said. I've made a kind of peace with it. There was nothing to say after that, so for a while neither of them said anything, and the silence did not feel like the kind that needed fixing. The roster changed without explanation. 2 mornings after that, her shift no longer ran past dark, the kennel torches restocked before anyone had to ask, an extra blanket left folded on the pen-side bench that hadn't been there the week before. She asked the steward about it. He said it was an administrative correction and did not meet her eyes when he said it, and she understood well enough not to press a man who clearly hadn't been given permission to explain. She did not thank Bastien. She did not know, with certainty, that it had been him. But she found herself glancing toward the hall windows at dusk more often than she used to, and telling herself it was only habit. Ilvana Rothmere arrived on the 4th day in a sleigh trimmed in silver fox, and the whole hall reorganized itself around her, the way halls do around women who were once meant to be its lady. Bastien. She said his name like a key turning in a lock that had always belonged to her. You look tired. The northern roads, I imagine. Ilvana. I heard you've taken an interest in your kennels. Her eyes found Odalis across the yard, found her precisely, the way a woman finds the one detail in a room that threatens her, and did not look away for a long moment. How industrious of you, keeping the help so well cared for. Odalis did not lower her eyes. She had learned, a long time ago, exactly how much a lowered gaze cost a person, and she had stopped paying it years before Ilvana Rothmere ever rode through this gate. The suppression failed fully 3 nights later, at the worst possible hour, in the worst possible room. The great hall, mid-supper, Ilvana at Bastien's right hand, making her claim plain to the assembled table, a treaty renewal, a marriage clause revived from his father's time that the council had never formally struck. Odalis had come only to deliver a message about a whelping bitch in difficult labour. She had not meant to be seen at all. The clasp gave entirely the moment Bastien's eyes found her in the doorway. It did not break loudly. It simply opened, the old silver seam splitting clean down its worn edge, and 19 years of carefully bound scent came loose into a room full of wolves and the men who wore their blood. Bastien's wolf did not merely notice. It surged. He came out of his chair so fast the goblet at his elbow went over, and for one raw, unguarded second every carefully held year of his composure simply was not there. His hands found the table edge and gripped it like a man holding himself down by force. The hall went silent in the particular way halls go silent when they have just watched something they were never meant to see. "Say that again," he said to Ilvana, very quietly, without looking at her, about the marriage clause. "Bastien, please, say it again." His voice did not rise. It did not need to. "Because I would like every person in this hall to understand precisely what you are asking me to sign away, while the mate my wolf has been trying to name for 3 weeks is standing in that doorway with her pendant broken open." The hall turned to look at Odalis. She did not run. She set down the whelping room message she'd been carrying, very deliberately, on the nearest table, and she did not flinch. Ilvana's claim did not die easily. She produced the old compact, her father's, Bastien's father's, a signature age brittle but legible, and pressed it before the council 2 days later, as though the broken pendant changed nothing at law. "A servant's scent seal breaking proves an accident of blood," she said, formally civil, the way she always was in rooms with witnesses. "It does not undo a compact, signed by 2 houses in good faith." It was Corwin who answered her, dry and unhurried, sliding a second document across the same table, a record older than the compact, a seal registry the archive had kept quietly for 200 years, listing every warded bloodline the old packs had once bound, and why. "Her line was sealed the year your father wrote that compact," Corwin said. "Sealed against a bond already forming, my lady, not against one that might form later. The old packs do not recognize claims made over a bond that predates them. Yours does not." Ilvana looked, for the first time since her sleigh had crossed the gate, afraid rather than certain of herself. She left the hall 3 mornings later, her claim struck, her person untouched, and no one in the estate ever spoke her name above a whisper again. He found Odalis afterward in the kennel yard, where he had always found her, doing the thing he had never once seen her stop doing. "You could have told me," he said, "about the pendant, what it was holding back." "I didn't know myself, not the shape of it," she said. "I only knew I'd been taught to hide since before I could ask why." He was quiet a moment. Then, because there was nothing left in the hall to perform for, and no reason left to hold the words back, "I searched every record in this house for 3 weeks, trying to give a name to what my wolf already knew. I want you to understand that I was afraid of the answer for exactly as long as it took me to see you kneeling in the mud with an animal no one else would touch." She looked at him, really looked, the way she'd been looking at him from doorways and windows for weeks, without letting herself call it anything, and for once neither of them reached for composure. He crossed the space between them and put his forehead against hers, and neither of them said anything for a long moment. She felt him breathe out, slow, like a man finally setting something down he had carried a long way. Weeks passed. The hall settled the way halls do, not entirely, not for everyone, but enough. Some of the older council still did not know quite what to do with a kennel keeper seated at the high table, and it was acknowledged quietly, without drama, and left to mend on its own time. The pendant sat open now on the window-sill of the room that had become, without much discussion, hers. She still kept the kennels. She still smelled of cold air and wolf, and the specific work her hands had always done, and she had not become anyone else. She had simply stopped being overlooked. The yearling wolf slept most nights by the hearth now, along with 2 others who had decided, in the manner of wolves, that where she was where they belonged. Bastien no longer stood in doorways, pretending he hadn't come looking for her. "Why did you change my shift that first week?" she asked him one evening, the fire low, the pendant catching the last of the light on the sill. "I didn't like the thought of you walking back to the lower quarters in the dark alone. That was months ago." "I'm aware," he said. She almost smiled at that. He kissed her once, careful, unhurried, like a man who had spent a long time deciding how to do it without frightening either of them, and the wolves did not stir by the fire, and nothing in the room needed explaining any more. If something you had hidden for 19 years broke open in front of everyone you feared, would you have let it stay broken, or tried to seal it shut again? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. Until next time,